On April 1, 1945, Field Marshal Walter Model stood by the window of his headquarters in the town of Olpa. Before his eyes stretched a landscape of total collapse, endless columns of exhausted soldiers, charred tanks, abandoned guns. The telephone on his desk had been silent for 2 days. Communication with Berlin was lost. Around his armies, the Allied ring tightened. Trapped inside were 300,000 German soldiers on a patch of land only 100 by 80 kilometers. Thus was born the Ruhr Pocket, the largest encirclement of the Wehrmacht in Western Europe. Within 2 weeks, more than 317,000 soldiers would lay down their arms. Hitler would call it treason. Historians would name this moment the point of no return. Model himself, 3 weeks later, would take his own life in a forest, unable to bear the disgrace of the greatest disaster of the German army in the West. How did the heart of German industry turn into a trap? Why did elite divisions surrender without a final battle? And what did the soldiers feel when they realized the war was lost forever? The Ruhr industrial region was the backbone of the German war machine. Here, between the rivers Ruhr and Lippe, were produced 65% of the Reich's coal and 80% of its steel. The largest chemical and engineering plants stood here. The cities of Essen, Dortmund, Düsseldorf formed the foundation of German war economy. The Allies understood this well. In March 1945, they carried out a series of devastating raids. The operation bore the codename Clarion. In a single night of March 11th, more than 1,000 bombers dropped almost 5,000 tons of bombs on Essen. Industry weakened but continued to function. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower knew, as long as the Ruhr supplied metal and munitions, the war would drag on. So the plan was ruthless: encircle the region, cut it off from the rest of Germany, and force surrender without bloody urban fighting. The task was given to the 12th and 9th U.S. Armies under General Omar Bradley. On paper, German forces looked formidable. Army Group B, under Field Marshal Model, numbered about 430,000 troops. But the reality was different. After the failure of the Ardennes offensive, the Wehrmacht never recovered. Divisions were under strength, depots half empty, fuel scarce. Young recruits were thrown into battle without training, while veterans were worn out by years of war. On March 23rd, the Allies launched Operation Plunder, the crossing of the Rhine. Within a week, they had secured bridgeheads on the eastern bank. The road to the encirclement of the Ruhr lay open. Morning of March 25, 1945. Lieutenant General Matthew Ridgway, commander of the 58th Airborne Corps, received orders to advance east from Wesel. His task: link up with the 1st U.S. Army advancing from the south and close the ring around the Ruhr. In the north, the 9th Army of General William Simpson had crossed the Rhine above Düsseldorf. Its strength, 8 infantry and 2 armored divisions, more than 300,000 soldiers, supported by 2,500 tactical aircraft. German resistance was weak. The 352nd Volksgrenadier Division had only 4,200 soldiers instead of the nominal 10,000. By evening of March 26th, the 9th Army's spearheads had advanced 15 kilometers deep. The pace of advance astonished even seasoned officers. Captain James Collins of the 2nd Armored Division recalled, "We moved as if on parade. The Germans retreated or surrendered in whole units. Organized resistance hardly existed." At the same time, from the south advanced the 1st Army of General Courtney Hodges. It had crossed the Rhine at Remagen, where on March 7th Americans had unexpectedly seized the Ludendorff Bridge. The bridgehead became a springboard for encircling the Ruhr. On March 28th, tanks of the 3rd Armored Division stormed into Marburg, cutting off the district from southern supply routes. Following them came the 9th Infantry Division, mopping up scattered defenders. In the city, the Allies captured depots with 50,000 tons of munitions. The Germans had no time to evacuate or destroy them. Model grasped the scale of the danger. On March 27th, he telegraphed Hitler requesting permission to retreat beyond the Ruhr. The reply came the next day: "Defend every meter to the last soldier. Retreat forbidden." With this order, hundreds of thousands of German soldiers were doomed. Model, a professional officer since the First World War, knew well. Encirclement without fuel and air cover meant catastrophe. But an order is an order. He began preparing the troops for circular defense. On March 30th, American tanks reached Paderborn. a key railway hub 80 kilometers east of the Ruhr. Here erupted one of the fiercest battles of the entire operation. The Panzergrenadier Division, Westphalia, formed from tank school cadets, counterattacked. Young SS fanatics fought furiously. The fighting lasted 2 days. The Americans lost 22 Shermans and more than 100 men. Yet Allied superiority was overwhelming. On April 1st, Paderborn fell. The path for the Union of American Armies lay wide open. April 1st, 1945, 1600 hours. Near the town of Lippstadt, 40 kilometers southeast of Paderborn, a symbolic meeting took place. A Sherman tank from the 3rd Armored Division of the 1st Army stopped before a vehicle from the 2nd Armored Division of the 9th Army. The commanders stepped out and shook hands. The Ruhr Pocket was closed. Inside were Army Group B under Field Marshal Model, elements of the 15th Army, remnants of armored and infantry divisions, Volkssturm detachments, SS units, and auxiliary formations. By U.S. intelligence estimates, about 430,000 German soldiers. The encircled territory covered 8,000 square kilometers, smaller than Cyprus, but larger than Luxembourg. Trapped inside were industrial giants, Dortmund, Essen, Bochum, Gelsenkirchen, Wuppertal. Along with them, about 4 million civilians. Model's headquarters was set up in Schloss Schnellenberg near the town of Attendorn. There he convened a meeting of senior commanders. The atmosphere was tense. Lieutenant General Joseph Harp, commander of the 5th Panzer Army, reported fuel for 3 days, ammunition for 1 week of heavy fighting, food for 10 days under strict rationing. Model asked bluntly, was a breakout possible? Chief of Staff Major General Karl Wagner answered honestly, no. The Allies dominated the skies, their forces outnumbered by many times. Any attempt at concentration would be spotted and crushed by air power. The Field Marshal decided, organize defense on the outer perimeter, turn cities into fortresses, conserve ammunition, and wait for a miracle, relief, or a change of situation. It was an illusion, but he saw no other way. The U.S. command acted with cold method. General Bradley divided tasks. The 1st Army would attack from the south and west, the 9th from the north and east. The strategy, divide the pocket into smaller sectors, isolate cities, force garrisons to surrender separately. On April 2nd began artillery preparation. Thousands of guns battered German positions, while aircraft struck roads and railways. In 1 day, the Allies carried out 1,847 sorties over the Ruhr. Lancasters and B-17s worked day and night. German flak fired accurately, but shells were desperately short. Soldiers in the pocket lost hope. Corporal Helmut Altner of the 116th Panzer Division wrote in his diary, "We dug in on the outskirts of Bochum. Endless artillery blasts, the wail of bombs. The sky belongs to them. Our planes are gone. Food is almost finished. Officers order us to hold. But for what?" On April 3rd, the Americans captured Hanover, cutting the last routes of help from the north. That same day, the Red Army began the assault on Vienna. The Reich was shrinking from all sides, and in the Ruhr, this was felt almost physically. On April 4th, 1945, the 79th U.S. Infantry Division approached Essen, the heart of German heavy industry. Here operated the Krupp conglomerate, cannons, tank turrets, submarines. Before the war, the city had 650,000 inhabitants. After the bombings, about 300,000 remained. Major General Ira Weiche, the division's commander, expected fierce resistance. But intelligence reported, the garrison was only 5,000 soldiers, mostly Volkssturm, the elderly and teenagers. Their weapons were outdated, their ammunition nearly gone. The battle for Essen lasted 4 days. Artillery methodically destroyed strongpoints. Infantry advanced block by block. Resistance was chaotic. Lone snipers, machine guns in basements, an occasional Panzerfaust. There was no coordination. On April 7th, the mayor of Essen, Julius Knierim, approached the Americans with a proposal to surrender the city to save civilians. The German commandant, Colonel Kurt Fischer, initially refused, but when American tanks rolled into the central square, he realized the hopelessness and signed the capitulation. The Americans were stunned by the scale of destruction. Major John Eisenhower, no relation to the general, wrote in his report, "The city looks like a lunar landscape. Whole buildings are rare. Factories are reduced to heaps of metal. People live in basements, starving. There is almost no resistance. They simply want this to end." Meanwhile, the Allies stormed Bochum, Dortmund, Gelsenkirchen. The pattern was the same: artillery preparation, airstrikes, tanks, and infantry. Garrisons surrendered after a few days of fighting. On April 10th, Dortmund fell. The garrison, only 3,200 men against 15,000 Americans. Commandant Major General Erich Abraham surrendered together with his staff when Shermans appeared at the town hall. In Gelsenkirchen, the situation was tougher. Here, remnants of the 116th Panzer Division held, veterans who had fought since 1940. They turned every building into a firing point. The 35th U.S. Infantry Division stormed the city for 8 days. Losses were relatively small, about 12 men per day, but psychologically exhausting. American officers noted German snipers fought to the last bullet, knowingly dooming themselves. On April 15th, resistance in Gelsenkirchen broke. 1,847 soldiers surrendered. About 400 were killed. Among the captives was Lieutenant General Gerhard Müller, the division's commander. At interrogation, he said only, "We fulfilled our order to the end. Now you may shoot us or send us to a camp. It makes no difference." By mid-April, the situation inside the pocket became critical. Food supplies were exhausted, and the military police increasingly recorded looting even among their own soldiers. In villages between cities, residents hid their last crumbs from starving troops, bricked up storerooms, buried sacks of flour in gardens. Field Marshal Model issued an order to requisition food from civilians. This caused open outrage. After years of war and bombings, many were already starving, and to take their last reserves meant condemning them to death. Some mayors refused to comply. They were immediately arrested. On April 18th, in the village of Altena, a revolt broke out. A group of peasants attacked a depot guarded by Wehrmacht soldiers. Shooting erupted. 3 civilians and 1 soldier were killed. The next day, the Gestapo executed 5 men as saboteurs. In reality, they were local farmers simply trying to survive. Desertion spread on a massive scale. Soldiers abandoned weapons, changed into civilian clothes, hid in attics and basements. Military police patrolled roads, checked documents, hanged deserters on poles with signs reading, "Traitor." In just 1 week, about 200 soldiers were executed, and still desertions continued. Commanders lost control of their units. Communications broke daily. Radios ran on dying batteries. Telephone lines lay in ruins. Couriers died under fire or surrendered to the Americans. Headquarters no longer understood the real state of their troops. Reports arrived with hours or days of delay, or never arrived at all. On April 19th, 1945, over the Ruhr Pocket appeared not bombers, but aircraft with loudspeakers. The Allies launched a massive psychological operation. From the skies rained millions of leaflets. On the photographs, German prisoners eating, smoking, smiling. The caption was blunt: "The war is lost. Surrender and live." Within a single day, 6 million leaflets were scattered over the Ruhr. They covered roads, trenches, rooftops. Wehrmacht soldiers picked them up, hid them in tunics, read them secretly at night by candlelight. Officers ordered them destroyed, but the ban had no effect. The leaflets were passed hand to hand, like a secret scrap of hope. Loudspeakers broadcast messages in German. "Comrades, Berlin is surrounded. Hitler hides in a bunker. Your families want you alive, not as dead heroes. Surrender. You will receive food, medical care, and return home after the war." The effect was powerful. First Lieutenant Hans Schulze of the 3rd Panzergrenadier Division recalled, "After these broadcasts, the men began to ask, 'Why are we still fighting? What are we dying for?' Officers had no answer. Talk of miracle weapons convinced no one. In the eyes of soldiers, you could read only one thing: we want to live. On April 20th, the Americans introduced new tactics. They announced safe corridors, routes along which German soldiers could approach without risk. On maps dropped from planes, red arrows marked the path to American lines. That same day near Hagen appeared the first groups with white flags. At first, 37 men, then another 64, and by evening already more than 200. Captain Robert Murphy remembered. They looked exhausted and hungry, yet relieved. One said in English, "Thank you for not shooting. For us, the war is over." Model tried to stop the wave of surrenders. He ordered execution of anyone who spoke of capitulation. Military tribunals passed hundreds of sentences for defeatist moods. But these shootings only increased hatred toward the command. Soldiers understood. They were being held in a trap and thrown into a senseless defense. On April 21st, American radio broadcast, General Bradley's appeal to Model, "Your situation is hopeless. Continued resistance will only cause the deaths of soldiers and civilians. I offer honorable surrender with guarantees of life and adherence to the Geneva Convention. I await your answer by noon, April 22nd. The Field Marshal convened a council. For 3 hours, the argument raged. Lieutenant General Harp declared, "Soldiers are starving. Ammunition is nearly gone. To continue fighting is a crime." To this, SS Representative Obersturmbannführer Kurt Meyer replied, "Surrender is betrayal of the Führer. We are obliged to fight to the end." Model remained silent. He knew, in Berlin, generals had been executed for less. Yet he also saw, the war was lost completely. He was trapped between an officer's honor and the futility of catastrophe. On April 22nd, the Allies began the final offensive. The task split the pocket into small cells, depriving the Germans of any coordination. The First Army pushed from the south toward Hagen and Iserlohn. The Ninth Army advanced from the north toward Recklinghausen and Dinslaken. German defense crumbled. Some divisions literally dissolved. Soldiers went home or surrendered. In the 9th Panzer Division, of 8,400 men, a little over 2,000 remained. In the 116th Panzer Grenadier, less than half strength. Many units existed only on paper. A telling episode occurred in Hagen. The 78th U.S. Infantry Division reached the city in the morning. Reconnaissance reported up to 3,000 defenders. Major General Edwin Parker ordered an artillery preparation. 48 howitzers opened fire. But within an hour, a delegation emerged from the city, the mayor, a Catholic priest, and 2 officers. They asked that the shelling stop. The commandant, Colonel Willibald Borscht, was ready to surrender Hagen to save civilian lives. The only condition, allow the soldiers to give up in an orderly fashion without humiliation. Parker agreed. At 1400 hours, 2,847 German soldiers assembled in the central square. They laid down their arms and formed into a column. Many wept, not from fear, but from relief. One NCO told an American interpreter, "At last, this hell is over. Now I will be able to see my wife and children." Scenes like this repeated everywhere. On April 23rd, Iserlohn surrendered without a fight. On the 24th, Recklinghausen. On the 25th, Dinslaken. Most German commanders understood continuing resistance merely to postpone the inevitable was pointless. There were exceptions. In the town of Witten, about 400 SS men from the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend dug in. They were 17 to 19-year-old fanatics who believed in victory to the end. Their commander, Sturmbannführer Hugo Krass, ordered them to fight to the last. The 95th U.S. Infantry Division assaulted the town for 3 days. The SS used Panzerfausts, mines, snipers. Every house became a fortress. The Americans replied with heavy artillery and air power. Witten was reduced to ruins. On April 26th, the resistance was broken. Only 89 soldiers were taken prisoner. The rest were killed. Among the dead was Krass. He was found with a pistol in his hand. Whether it was suicide or a bullet that struck him remains unknown. On April 27th, the Ruhr Pocket effectively ceased to exist. Only scattered groups remained, cut off from one another. Communications vanished. Each unit acted on its own, deciding surrender or die. The overwhelming majority chose life. On April 28, 1945, Field Marshal Model's headquarters moved into a forest near the small town of Wenden. It could hardly be called a headquarters now. More, a band of fugitives. Roughly 30 officers remained, a few vehicles, and a single radio transmitter that had long since lost contact. Model understood. The end was near. That evening, he convened a final conference. Present were Chief of Staff Major General Karl Wagner, 5th Panzer Army Commander Joseph Harp, and a handful of officers. The Field Marshal's words were brief. "Gentlemen, I release you from your oath. The Army Group has ceased to exist. The war is lost. Each of you must decide, surrender or attempt to break out." After this, he asked his aide, Oberleutnant Winrich Baer, to leave him alone. Baer remembered his commander's last words. "Tell my wife that I loved her. Tell my children to remember their father as a soldier, not a traitor." Model took out a Walther P-38, checked the magazine, and set it on the table. That same night, he wrote 2 letters, one to his family, the other to General Eisenhower. In it, he explained that he could not personally capitulate, as he had sworn an oath to the Führer, but he ordered his subordinates to surrender to save lives. He asked that the Geneva Convention be observed for the prisoners. He signed and sealed the letters. In the morning of April 29th, Model walked into the forest carrying only the pistol. The aide followed, but Model ordered him to halt. 15 minutes later, a shot rang out. Baer ran toward the sound and found the field marshal beneath an oak, a bullet to the head, the pistol beside him. Soldiers buried him in an unmarked grave in the same forest. A week later, the Americans, guided by local residents, found the burial. Using documents, they identified the body and reinterred it at the military cemetery in Vosswinkel, where the grave remains to this day. Model's death became the symbol of the Ruhr Pocket's end. He had been a talented commander, halting Soviet offensives more than once at Rzhev and Kursk. But now his professionalism and devotion to the army broke against the obvious. The war was lost, and further sacrifice was senseless. An officer's honor collided with catastrophe, and the field marshal chose death. On April 30th, the Allies officially announced the liquidation of the Ruhr Pocket. The operation was over. Only local mopping up remained, small groups of soldiers still hiding in forests and cellars. Over the following week, most of them laid down their arms. Counting the prisoners took several weeks. The American administration created special camps where soldiers were registered, photographed, had their documents checked, and were sorted by rank and unit. The official statistics are striking. From April 1st to April 18th, 1945, within the Ruhr Pocket, 317,000 German servicemen surrendered. Among them, 24 generals, 347 staff officers, more than 7,000 field-grade officers, about 38,000 NCOs. The rest were enlisted men. Among the generals were 15th Army Commander Colonel General Gustav Adolf von Zangen, Commander of the Parachute Army, General of Aviation Alfred Schlemm, Commander of the 116th Panzer Division, Lieutenant General Gerhard Müller, Commander of the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division, Major General Walter Deinhardt. All surrendered without resistance, some even with relief. The Allies also captured enormous materiel. A report of the 12th Army Group under General Bradley, dated April 25th, recorded 742 tanks, mostly Panzer IV and Panther, as well as a few Tiger, 1,847 self-propelled guns, 394 armored personnel carriers, more than 5,000 artillery pieces of calibers from 75 to 210 millimeters, 863 rocket launchers, 28 railway guns. In addition, 47,300 cars and trucks, more than 1,200 motorcycles, about 700 prime movers, more than 12,000 horses, 94 ammunition depots, 176 fuel depots, 23 field hospitals, 67 large radio stations. Yet most of the equipment was unusable. Tanks without fuel, guns without shells, vehicles without wheels. According to the trophy team's estimates, only about 15% of the captured armaments were truly combat-ready. The rest were scrap metal or required major overhaul. German losses were also significant. Killed, about 10,000 soldiers. Exact figures are unknown, as many bodies remained under the rubble. 14,820 wounded were admitted to American hospitals. Missing were estimated between 30 and 50,000, mostly deserters who disappeared among civilians. Allied losses were surprisingly small. For the entire period of encirclement, 2,304 killed, 8,139 wounded, and 459 missing. The loss ratio stood at 1-4 in favor of the Americans. This outcome was explained by complete air superiority, German shortages of ammunition, and a collapse in morale. Civilian losses were the hardest to count. By rough estimates, about 6,000 residents of the Ruhr region died during the April 1945 fighting and bombings. Thousands were wounded, hundreds of thousands left homeless. The Americans faced a colossal logistical dilemma: where to house 317,000 prisoners. Existing camps were designed for far smaller contingents, so improvisation was necessary. Alongside permanent camps, temporary open-air cities appeared. Meadows fenced with barbed wire, where Germans lived under the sky or in tents. The largest such camp was organized near Remagen. The area, about 4 square kilometers, the contingent, 86,000 prisoners of war. There were no barracks, only tents supplied by the Red Cross and the British Army. Food was provided once a day, a standard ration pack, canned meat, hardtack, water. Sanitation at first was dreadful, 200 field latrines for tens of thousands of people. With bitter irony, the Germans called these enclosures the Rhine meadows. Along the river stretched endless rows of tents. Conditions triggered a wave of disease: dysentery, pneumonia, exhaustion. U.S. Army medics could not keep up with the stream of the sick. In the first 2 weeks, about 1,200 prisoners died. The International Red Cross insisted on immediate improvements. By mid-May, the situation stabilized. More medicine and staff arrived, rations increased, full sanitary blocks and isolation units were deployed. Mortality dropped to 5 to 7 persons per day, among 86,000, a rate acceptable for such a mass in field conditions. Interrogations of prisoners gave predictable answers to the question, "Why did you surrender en masse?" Corporal Klaus Wimmer, 272nd Infantry Division. "We were starving, freezing, had no ammunition. Officers told us to hold, but they no longer believed it themselves. The leaflets promised food and life. We chose to live." Sergeant Fritz Schmidt, 9th Panzer Division. After the death of Field Marshal Model, it became clear: the end. Commanders lost control. Each man decided for himself. We laid down arms and went to the Americans. They did not beat us, they fed us. That is better than dying for nothing. Lieutenant Helmut Stein, 116th Panzer Grenadier. I saw Russia, I saw the ruins of our cities after bombings, and I understood Germany had lost. To continue meant to die for a mad Führer in a bunker. I chose life for the sake of my family. U.S. Army psychologists summarized the conclusion. After the encirclement in the pocket, Wehrmacht soldiers lost faith completely. In victory, in leadership, in ideology. Most wanted only one thing: to survive the war and return home. Rhetoric about miracle weapons and final victory no longer worked. When confirmed reports of the mass capitulation in the Ruhr reached Berlin, Hitler exploded in fury. On April 21st, at a bunker conference, he accused Field Marshal Model of treason. Chief of the OKW operations staff, Colonel General Alfred Jodl, tried to explain. It was not betrayal, but an unavoidable military catastrophe. The Führer refused to listen. The order was given: find Model, try him by military tribunal, and execute him. When, a week later, news arrived of his suicide, Hitler snapped, "Coward, a true German officer does not shoot himself. He fights to the end." This remark would later appear in Jodl's post-war accounts. The propaganda machine tried to mask the scale of the defeat. On April 23rd, official bulletins spoke of heavy fighting in the Ruhr region, heroic resistance, and temporary difficulties. Not a word of encirclement and surrender, but rumors spread instantly. German citizens heard the truth from Allied broadcasts. German-language programs of the BBC reported 317,000 German soldiers surrendered in the Ruhr. The war is lost. Hitler is leading the country to ruin. Surrender, save your life. Millions secretly listened, despite the ban and threat of execution. Joseph Goebbels tried a counterattack. On April 25th, he declared on the radio, The defeat in the West is temporary. A new weapon is ready. The offensive will begin any moment. Victory will be ours. But even loyal supporters no longer believed. In the Wehrmacht, the Ruhr disaster caused shock. Officers admitted if hundreds of thousands surrendered without prolonged battles, what would stop other formations from doing the same? Morale collapsed. Inspector General of the Army Heinz Guderian told Jodl, "The Ruhr is the beginning of the end. From here, it will only get worse." On April 28th, Hitler signed an order creating field tribunals with the right of immediate execution for surrender, desertion, and defeatist moods. In the next 10 days, about 600 soldiers were executed, but it did not halt the avalanche of capitulations. Soldiers surrendered first by hundreds, then by thousands. The Ruhr defeat accelerated the army's collapse. If before many were held back by fear of supposed Allied cruelty, now everyone saw. The prisoners were alive, fed, and treated under the rules. Fear was replaced by hope. The Ruhr operation became a classic example of an encirclement battle in modern war. American and British staffs dissected it as a model of how to trap a large enemy force with minimal losses of their own. Several key factors drove success. First, absolute air supremacy. The Allies had thousands of aircraft against the pitiful remnants of the Luftwaffe. Any German attempt to concentrate forces or supply lines was blocked from the sky. Constant aerial presence also weighed heavily on morale. Second, superiority on the ground and in logistics. Formally, at the start of encirclement, there were about 400,000 American and 430,000 German troops, but real combat capability was incomparable. The U.S. had full depots of ammunition, fuel, food, and steady reinforcements. The Wehrmacht faced critical shortages of everything. Third, refined logistics. The Allies applied lessons from earlier campaigns. Frontline units received ammunition and fuel rapidly. Wounded were evacuated quickly by ambulance and aircraft. Equipment was repaired on site by mobile brigades. The system ran without disruption, sustaining high operational tempo. Fourth, deliberate psychological operations. Leaflets, broadcasts, and clear guarantees of humane treatment undermined resistance as effectively as artillery. Soldiers saw a legal path to survival. Fifth, fatal German leadership decisions. The ban on retreat doomed the force to encirclement. Model obeyed orders, knowing their futility. The absence of a realistic breakout plan, command chaos, and exhaustion of resources made defeat inevitable. British military historian Basil Liddell Hart called the Ruhr the perfect encirclement. In his History of the Second World War, he noted that the Americans demonstrated a model of destroying a large enemy force by combining speed, firepower, psychological pressure, and logistical excellence, a scheme studied for decades in military academies. Soviet commanders also analyzed the operation. Marshal Georgy Zhukov wrote in his memoirs that the Ruhr Pocket exposed the weakness of German defenses in the West, while the Allies acted decisively and professionally, preferring siege and psychological collapse over frontal assaults, typical of the Soviet school in certain directions. For the Wehrmacht, the Ruhr became a symbol of collapse, the loss of 317,000 men in a matter of weeks without a serious breakout attempt. Shattered the myth of invincibility. Soldiers and officers saw, if even the elite surrendered en masse, the slogan of "fight to the end" was an empty phrase. Behind dry figures and statistics stand people. Each of the 317,000 prisoners had a personal story, a path into the pocket, and a decision to lay down arms. Corporal Hans Kirchner, born in 1922 in a Bavarian village. Drafted in 1941, fought in Russia, was wounded near Kursk, but in 1944 returned to the front. He found himself in the Ruhr Pocket with the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division. He surrendered to the Americans on April 12th near Essen. In the camp, he fell gravely ill with pneumonia, yet survived. In 1946, he returned home and worked as a farmer. He died in 1998, never speaking to his grandchildren about the war. Lieutenant Werner Holtz, born in 1920 in Berlin to a professor's family, educated, fluent in 3 languages. Served in the 116th Panzer Division, commanding a platoon of Panthers. His tank was knocked out. The crew survived. He surrendered on April 18th. In the camp, he taught English to prisoners. After the war, he worked as a translator for the Allies, later as a teacher. In 1962, he published the memoir, The Last Days of the Ruhr. He died in 1989, a few months before the fall of the Berlin Wall. Sergeant Karl Weber, born in 1918 in the Ruhr, a coal miner. Drafted in 1939, he went through Poland, France, and the Eastern Front. Wounded 3 times, twice awarded the Iron Cross. In the Pocket, he commanded a machine gun team. He surrendered on April 14th when ammunition and rations ran out. In 1946, he returned to his wife and children and worked rebuilding the mines. He never said whether he considered capitulation the right decision. He died in 1982 of lung cancer, a miner's disease. SS Sturmbannführer Hans Kemmler, born in 1915 in Munich, a member of the NSDAP since 1933, a fanatical supporter of the regime, fought with the Hitlerjugend division, refused to surrender, urged fighting to the death. On April 16th, he was wounded and captured unconscious. In the camp, he tried to organize underground resistance. For this, he was put in solitary confinement. In 1946, he was sentenced to 15 years for war crimes. He died in Landsberg prison in 1953 of a heart attack. Medic Friedrich Meyer, born in 1925 in Hamburg. The youngest of 4 brothers, the 3 elder ones were killed in the war. Drafted in 1943, he completed medical training. In the Pocket, he served in a field hospital, saving the wounded under fire. On April 11th, the hospital was captured by the Americans, but Meyer continued treating both his own and the enemy. In 1945, he was released for humanitarian service. He later became a physician, worked with the Red Cross, and traveled to conflict zones. He died in 2011 at the age of 86. His obituary read, "A man who saved lives when others were taking them." Lieutenant General Joseph Harp, born in 1887 in Prussia, a professional soldier since the Kaiser's army. In the First World War, he served in the trenches. In the Second, he commanded the 5th Panzer Army. In the Ruhr, he advised Model to capitulate to save the troops. He surrendered on April 21st with his staff. In interrogation, he cooperated, describing Wehrmacht's strategy. Released in 1948, he wrote articles about the mistakes of German command. He died in 1968 and was buried in a military cemetery, Private Ludwig Schmitz, born in 1927 in Cologne. Drafted at 17, after 3 weeks of training, he was sent to the Ruhr. He never fired a shot. On April 2nd, on the first day of the encirclement, he surrendered with a group of boys just like him. The Americans were astonished. "You are soldiers? You are children." After the war, he finished school and university and became a history teacher. He told his pupils, "War is not heroism. It is fear, hunger, and death." I live because I refuse to be a foolish hero. Each of these stories is a drop in the ocean of war. Yet from such drops the real history is made. 317,000 men in the Ruhr Pocket. That is not a number in a bulletin. They were fathers, sons, brothers, husbands. Some died in camps, some returned home, some never forgave themselves for surrender, and for others it was the wisest decision of their lives. The loss of the Ruhr industrial region proved fatal for the Third Reich. By April 1945, the region supplied about 60% of coal, half of pig iron, and up to 70% of steel, on which the war economy depended. After the encirclement and Allied capture, production essentially stopped. Minister of Armaments and Munitions, Albert Speer sent Hitler a memorandum on April 15th. The loss of the Ruhr makes continuing the war impossible from an industrial standpoint. Ammunition output will fall by 80% within a month. Repair of tanks and aircraft will become impossible. The army will be unable to fight for lack of means. The Führer read it and dismissed Speer without a decision. He still lived in a world where miracle weapons and fanatical will would overcome the enemy's material superiority. Reality was ruthless. By April 20th, tank production had fallen from 300 machines per month to roughly 40, aircraft from 1,200 to 150. Artillery ammunition shrank from 2 million per month to 200,000. The troops still drew on depot leftovers, but those dwindled quickly. On the Eastern Front, on April 16th, the Red Army launched the final assault on Berlin. German units fought desperately, but constantly suffered from shortages of shells and fuel. Artillery rationed every round. Tanks died for lack of gasoline. Infantry held with small arms. The loss of the Ruhr was felt on every sector. In the west, American and British armies advanced with little serious resistance. After the liquidation of the Ruhr Pocket, the road into the heart of the country lay open. On April 25th, American and Soviet forces met on the Elbe near Torgau. Germany was cut in two. The end felt close and certain. The civilian population sank into apathy. Propaganda no longer worked. Rumors of mass surrender in the Ruhr, of Field Marshal Model's suicide, and of the Allies' approach merely confirmed the obvious. The war was lost. People hid in cellars, prayed, and waited for the end. The Reich's economy collapsed. Smashed bridges and junctions paralyzed the railways. Food supply broke down. Hunger gripped the cities. The black market flourished. Prices soared sky high. A kilogram of bread cost hundreds of Reichsmarks, while an official monthly wage was 200. On April 30th, Hitler shot himself in his Berlin bunker. On May 2nd, the city capitulated. On May 7th, Colonel General Alfred Jodl signed the act of Germany's unconditional surrender. And on May 8th, the war in Europe officially ended. The 1,000-year Reich had lived only 12 years and 3 months. The Ruhr disaster became one of the last nails in Nazi Germany's coffin. Not the only one, but a massive one. The 317,000 soldiers who surrendered in a matter of weeks showed that the army no longer believed, no longer wanted, and no longer could fight. When soldiers en masse choose captivity over a hopeless battle, the war is irretrievably lost. 80 years have passed since those April days of 1945. The cities of the Ruhr are rebuilt, factories hum, people live ordinary lives. It is hard to imagine that one of the greatest military catastrophes of the 20th century raged here, yet memory remains, in museums, memorials, archives, and in the testimonies of those who survived. The Ruhr Pocket became a mirror of collapsing illusions. Nazi propaganda had long insisted that the German soldier was the strongest, the army invincible, and the Führer a guide to greatness. Reality said otherwise. Ideology does not replace food. Patriotism does not stop tanks. Fanaticism does not manufacture ammunition. Allied commanders learned the lesson. Modern war is not only tanks and planes. It is logistics, morale, and psychology. One can possess fearsome weapons and lose through human exhaustion. One can outnumber the enemy and squander advantage through wrong strategy. Victory in the Ruhr was achieved not only by force, but by intellect. For German soldiers, the pocket became a lifelong trauma. For some, capitulation was shame and treason. For others, salvation and the only chance to see their families. There were those who believed in nothing but survival. War broke millions, and the Ruhr was another stone in that mill. Field Marshal Walter Model remains a controversial figure, a talented commander who won battles, and at the same time, an executor of a criminal regime's orders that sent soldiers to die for senseless aims. Was his suicide an officer's honor or a flight from responsibility? Historians still argue. The fact remains. He could not accept the obvious. The war was lost, and continuing it had become a crime against his own troops. What remains of those days? Numbers in textbooks, documents in archives, photographs of ruins and prisoner columns, and a lesson. Any war launched for a dictator's ambition ends in catastrophe. Any ideology that places abstraction above human life is doomed to fail. Any army without moral foundation crumbles. The Ruhr Pocket exposed the truth of the Reich's last days. Hunger, chaos, desertion, capitulations, everything propaganda hid. Soldiers stopped believing promises, officers lost control, the system collapsed under its own weight. When the end came, it was swift and merciless. Today, in an era of new wars and conflicts, the Ruhr's experience remains relevant. It reminds us, war is not a parade or medals, but death and ruins. The victor is not the one strongest on paper, but the one better organized, supported by society, and morally justified. The 317,000 soldiers in the Ruhr made the only rational choice in catastrophe. They chose life. They went home instead of a heroic death in the name of madness. History does not condemn them. It reminds us, sometimes true courage is to acknowledge defeat and save the living. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945, but its consequences are still felt. Millions dead, cities destroyed, families torn apart, generations scarred. The Ruhr is only one episode of this tragedy, yet a telling one. Empires built on violence and lies are doomed to fall. And the higher they rise, the harder they crash. A month after the capitulations in the Ruhr, Europe finally knew silence. Germany lay in ruins. Millions of prisoners awaited repatriation. Millions of civilians searched for the missing. Millions of refugees returned, if there was anywhere to return. An era of rebuilding and reconciliation began, with the hope that it would not happen again. Have we learned the lesson? The question remains open. Wars continue. Dictators lead nations to the brink. Propaganda manipulates millions. But the Ruhr story reminds us, reality eventually defeats illusion. Soldiers refuse to die for another's ambition. People say, no, life is worth more than any dogma. On April 18, 1945, in certain corners of the Ruhr, silence reigned for the first time in years. No explosions, no thunder. People stepped from cellars, looked into the sun, and wept with relief. Ahead lay hunger, cold, and uncertainty. But they were alive, and that was everything. The memory of the Ruhr Pocket lives not for glorification or condemnation, but as a warning. The cost of war is too high, life is fragile, and reason is stronger than fanaticism. 317,000 chose life, and survived. Thousands chose otherwise, and died. History records the facts. When the choice is between senseless death and life, the answer is clear. The Ruhr Pocket closed for most formations in April 1945, yet its echo still sounds. It asks, can we recognize lies before catastrophe? Do we have the courage to say no to madness? Future generations will seek the answers, and still the lesson has already been spoken, plain and stark. True victory is peace, life above ideologies, reason stronger than fanaticism. That is the Ruhr's central meaning. On morning of July 26, 1943, Sicily, Oberleutnant Kurt Meyer, a German reconnaissance officer, stands near a destroyed bridge close to Nicolosi. In his hands is a report from the forward units. He reads it a second time, a third time. He cannot believe his eyes. American motorized columns advanced 180 kilometers in a single day. Vehicles of an unknown type. Mobility, flawless. No traffic jams, no breakdowns. Meyer glances at his own Kubelwagens, stuck in the dust. Half of them are under repair. And the Americans, they move forward as if roads don't matter at all. He does not yet know that he is witnessing the beginning of one of the greatest logistical revolutions in military history. A small car with a strange name, Jeep, will transform the war. Speed will become a weapon. December 7th, 1941. Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. The American Army has only 174,000 soldiers. By comparison, just on the Eastern Front, the Wehrmacht has more than 3,800,000. The German army is sharpened by the lightning campaigns of Poland, France, and the Balkans. But the United States possesses something no other army in the world has: industry. In 1940, President Roosevelt demands 50,000 planes a year. Generals laugh, impossible. Yet by 1944, American factories produce 96,000 planes annually. Among thousands of tanks, guns, and ships, there was also one more. A vehicle that looks simple and modest. The Willys MB. A machine that quickly received a short, ringing name: Jeep. During the war, they built 640,000 of them, more than all German tanks combined. The Wehrmacht had Tigers and Panthers, the Luftwaffe had Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. But against the Jeep, the Germans had no answer. Because the Jeep was not just transport, it was mobility. It was the ability to move where roads did not exist. When the Wehrmacht encountered this in real combat, the shock was absolute. July 1940. The U.S. Army announces a tender for a light reconnaissance vehicle. The requirements seem impossible. Weight, up to 590 kilograms. Payload, 270 kilograms. Wheelbase, maximum 2.13 meters. Four-wheel drive, engine minimum 40 horsepower. And most important, the first prototype must be ready in 49 days. Most manufacturers do not even apply. But the tiny Bantam Car Company of Butler, Pennsylvania, takes the risk. For them, it is the last chance to survive. Chief Engineer Karl Probst works 18 hours a day. He sketches directly with chalk on the workshop floor in full scale. It's faster that way. On September 21st, exactly 49 days later, the first prototype appears, the Bantam BRC. It is delivered to the test ground at Fort Holabird, Maryland. The military greet it with skepticism. An open body, zero protection, windshield folding onto the hood. A toy? But when trials begin, doubts vanish. The vehicle drives off-road at 80 kilometers per hour, climbs 45-degree slopes, crosses rivers up to the axle, and tows a full ton instead of the claimed 270 kilograms. After 3 days of testing, the report contains just one word: suitable. But the Army does not want to depend on one company. Bantam's drawings are passed to Willys Overland and Ford. The race begins. Willys installs a stronger 60 horsepower engine, Ford strengthens the body, Bantam improves the suspension. The result is the chosen version, the Willys MB, the optimal mix of power, durability, and simplicity. On July 23, 1941, a contract is signed for 16,000 vehicles. But this is only the beginning. The Willys MB weighs 1,100 kilograms. By comparison, the German Kübelwagen Type 82 weighs only 715 kilograms, but its cross-country ability is far worse. Technical specifications of the Willys MB: engine, inline 4, 2.2 liters, power 60 horsepower at 4,000 RPM. Torque, 149 Newton meters at 2,000 RPM. Excellent pull at low speed. Transmission, 3-speed gearbox plus transfer case with low range. 8 gears forward, 2 in reverse. Wheelbase, 2.03 meters, turning radius, 5.3 meters. Ground clearance, 22 centimeters, approach and departure angles. 45 degrees fuel tank, 56 liters. Consumption, 15 to 20 liters per 100 kilometers on road. 25 to 30 off-road range. About 300 kilometers maximum speed, 105 kilometers per hour on asphalt. The simple, reliable design was the key. A steel frame, body bolted on, removable in 2 hours. Solid axles front and rear with leaf spring suspension, rough but indestructible. A bent spring could be straightened with a hammer right in the field. In autumn 1941 at Fort Benning, one Jeep covered 800 kilometers through forests, swamps, and rocky hills, without a single breakdown. After inspection, engine fine, suspension intact, transmission working perfectly. In December 1941, General George Marshall, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, personally takes the wheel. Across a snowy training ground, he drives up a steep slope, fords a stream, and after the test utters only one phrase: "This is the most useful tool created for this war." He had no idea just how right he was. January 1942. The Willys Overland plant in Toledo, Ohio, works without interruption. 3 shifts of 8 hours. The assembly line never stops. Every 2 minutes, a new Jeep comes off. At Ford in Richmond, California, the pace is the same. Every 2 minutes, one vehicle. This is not a miracle. This is the result of standardization. Every part is made to an accuracy of tenths of a millimeter. A bolt from Toledo fits an engine from Richmond. A wheel assembled at one plant is mounted on a vehicle from another. Complete interchangeability. Unification that turns production into a precise mechanism. In Germany, it is different. The Kübelwagen is produced in Wolfsburg, but assembly is almost manual. Parts are hand-fitted. The result, 50 to 60 vehicles per day. The Americans produce 640 Jeeps a day, and that is only manufacturing. The Army builds an entire support system. By the end of 1942, there are 12 spare parts depots operating in Great Britain. Each is capable of servicing 10,000 Jeeps. An engine consists of 1,200 parts, but the Army knows. 90% of failures are caused by 50 key components. Those spare parts always go first. The average time to restore a vehicle? Only 4 hours. For comparison, repair of the German armored car, SDKFZ, 222 took 18 to 24 hours. Often impossible at all because the necessary parts were not available. But the most striking thing is different. By the end of 1943, 35% of American soldiers work in some capacity in technical support. Drivers, mechanics, logisticians. In the Wehrmacht, only 18%. It might seem the Germans are more efficient. In reality, the opposite is true. The United States understands. The war is not won only at the front. Victory is born in the rear, on the assembly line, in the depots, on the roads, and in repair workshops. And the Jeep becomes the heart of that system. November 1942. Operation Torch. American forces land in Morocco and Algeria. This is their first large operation in the European theater. And it is here the Jeep faces its true combat test. North Africa is a desert. Dunes 10 to 15 meters high. Daytime heat up to 50 degrees Celsius. Night chill down to 5 degrees Celsius. Sandstorms. Almost no roads. Distances counted in hundreds of kilometers. Rommel's Afrika Korps uses armored cars, SDKFZ 222 and SDKFZ 231. On hard ground, they are fast, up to 80 kilometers per hour, but in sand they get stuck. The Americans push forward with Jeeps. November the 23rd, 1942, near Kasserine, Tunisia. A reconnaissance platoon of the 1st Armored Division, 6 Jeeps, moves along a dried riverbed at 60 kilometers per hour. Ahead, a German patrol of 2 SDKFZ 222s. The Germans open fire with 20mm guns from 800 meters. The Americans disperse, maneuver between dunes, and swing round the flank. 3 Jeeps get into position. Each mounts a Browning M2 machine gun of 12.7mm caliber. Simultaneous fire from 3 directions. The German vehicles try to turn, but they bog down in the sand. The fight lasts 7 minutes. Both German vehicles are destroyed. The Americans lose no men. This is not accidental. This is a new tactic. A Jeep will not survive a direct hit, but it does not need to. Its strength is speed, maneuverability, unpredictability. By the end of November, the Germans record 47 clashes with American Jeeps. In 39 cases, Wehrmacht patrols withdraw or suffer losses. Oberleutnant Heinz Schmidt writes in an Afrika Korps report, American reconnaissance vehicles move at speeds our machines cannot reach. Their tactic is strike and withdraw. They appear suddenly, open fire, and vanish before we can respond. But the role of Jeeps in North Africa is not limited to combat. December 1942, Tunisia. The 1st Infantry Division advances inland, from the coast to the front, about 240 kilometers. There are no roads, only caravan tracks across the sand. The problem is simple and acute: how to supply 16,000 soldiers with ammunition, food, and water across such distance. The Germans use heavy Opel Blitz trucks with a payload of about 3 tons, but in the desert, their average speed is only 15 to 20 kilometers per hour. They often get stuck in the sand and are prone to overheating. The Americans choose a different approach: Jeep convoys. 1 Jeep carries 270 kilograms of cargo. At first glance, not much, but Jeeps have another advantage: speed and flexibility. Even off-road, they keep 50 to 60 kilometers per hour. A convoy of 40 Jeeps transports 10.8 tons in one run. Travel time, about 4 hours one way. In a day, 3 trips, that is roughly 32.4 tons daily. Theoretically, a German convoy of 10 Opel Blitz trucks can carry about 30 tons in one run. But the trip takes on average 12 hours one way, and that is only if the trucks do not get stuck. In a day, they make 1 run. Captain James Carter, logistics officer of the 1st Infantry Division, notes in a December report, "In the last 3 weeks, no Jeep has been lost due to breakdown. 2 vehicles detonated mines. Crews survived thanks to the light construction, which absorbed the blast. Average delivery speed has increased by 2.3 times compared to using trucks." There is another important factor: dispersion. Jeeps can move singly or in small groups. They do not create large concentrations easily spotted from the air. German trucks, however, must move in columns. Otherwise, pulling out a stuck vehicle is practically impossible. A column of 20 trucks stretches for kilometers and raises a huge dust cloud, visible for tens of kilometers. The Luftwaffe hunts such columns. On January 8, 1943, German Ju-87 Stukas attack a Wehrmacht convoy near Sfax. 8 trucks destroyed, 4 damaged, 23 soldiers killed. That same day, an American Jeep convoy passed only 15 kilometers from the attack site and remained unnoticed. Vehicles moved singly with intervals of 200 to 300 meters. By February 1943, the American Army in North Africa has about 4,200 Jeeps. The Germans, approximately 380 light vehicles of all types. The ratio, almost 11 to 1. And that advantage is felt on every run, in every operation. March 1943. Aberdeen, Proving Ground, Maryland. Army engineers pose a simple question. Can the Jeep be turned into a fighting vehicle? They begin experiments with various armaments. The first attempt, mounting a Browning M2 machine gun of 12.7 millimeters on a turret. The gun weighs 38 kilograms. Ammunition, belt plus boxes, about 90 kilograms. The Jeep bears the load, but another problem appears: recoil. The M2 fires at a rate of 450 to 550 rounds per minute. Each shot delivers a significant jolt. During long bursts, the vehicle vibrates. Aimed fire becomes difficult. The solution is simple: a tripod with shock absorbers attached to the rear of the Jeep. The dampers absorb the recoil. The gunner stands behind, holding the weapon's grips. Tests show the setup allows aimed fire from a fixed position out to 800 meters on the move, up to 400 meters. The second experiment, the M1 bazooka, 60 millimeters. Effective range about 120 meters, armor penetration up to 80 millimeters. 3 bazookas were mounted on a Jeep, 2 on the sides, 1 at the rear. Crew, 3 soldiers. Tactic, sudden flank rush, salvo of 3 rockets and immediate withdrawal. The third experiment, the mortar Jeep. The 60 millimeter M2 mortar, 19 kilograms, can be mounted on the floor between the seats. Maximum range, 1.8 kilometers, rate, up to 18 rounds per minute. This made the Jeep a mobile fire platform to support infantry. But the boldest experiment, mounting a 37 millimeter anti-tank gun, M3. The gun with its carriage weighs 413 kilograms. Too much for a Jeep, so engineers remove the carriage and mount the barrel directly to the frame, barrel backward, and add 2 jacks for stabilization during firing. As a result, the Jeep with the gun weighs about 1,650 kilograms, still within acceptable limits. Deployment time for firing, 45 seconds, folding up, 30 seconds. Effective range, about 900 meters. Armor penetration, approximately 50 millimeters at 500 meters. May 1943, Tunisia. An experimental platoon of 6 such gun jeeps is sent to the front under Captain Richard Cole. On May 17th, near Medjez el Bab, the platoon encounters a German column, 2 medium tanks, Ps KPFW, 4 and 5 trucks. Distance, 1,200 meters. Cole orders a flank approach using the terrain's rises. The jeeps rush at 70 kilometers per hour. In 3 minutes, they are in position, 600 meters from the column, in the dead zone for tank guns. 6 guns open fire simultaneously. The first, Ps KPFW. 4 receives a hit in the flank and catches fire. The second tries to turn its turret, but the jeeps are already withdrawing, maneuvering, and delivering another volley. The fight lasts 11 minutes. 2 tanks knocked out, 3 trucks destroyed, 2 captured. No American casualties. In his report, Cole writes, "Mobility is our main advantage. We can choose position, strike, and disappear before the enemy can reply. A jeep with a gun is not a tank. It is a predator." By the end of 1943, the U.S. Waist Army has about 850 such predators, fast, unexpected, and deadly when used with the right tactics. July 10th, 1943. Operation Husky. The Allies land on Sicily. The American 7th Army under General George Patton comes ashore on the southern coast near Jala. The overall Allied plan is to capture the island in 30 days. Patton thinks differently. Do it in 15. But the challenge is immense. Sicily is a mountainous island. Roads are narrow, winding, often broken, most bridges destroyed. The British 8th Army under General Montgomery advances slowly, 5 to 8 kilometers a day. Heavy tanks and artillery bog down on mountain roads. Patton chooses another tactic. He forms mobile groups, 200 to 300 soldiers, 40 to 50 jeeps, a few light trucks. The mission? Bypass German positions, strike into the rear, and block retreat routes. July 22, 1943, the northern coast of Sicily. Colonel Lucian Truscott's task force receives orders. Beat the Germans to Palermo, distance to the city, 160 kilometers, no direct roads. On Truscott's map, an old mule trail through the mountains, width 2 to 2.5 meters, gradients up to 30 degrees. The Germans believe no vehicles can pass. Truscott thinks otherwise. July 23rd, 0430 hours. A column of 47 jeeps departs. The first 20 kilometers are dirt road, speed 40 kilometers per hour. Then begins the mule path. Jeeps move single file, 30 meters apart. Speed drops to 15 kilometers per hour. On one side a cliff, on the other a sheer drop. Drivers push themselves to the limit. Any mistake could be fatal. By 1100 hours they have covered 60 kilometers. A short stop, equipment check, refueling from jerry cans. No breakdowns. Then comes the descent to the plain. Speed rises to 60 kilometers per hour. At 1430, the column reaches the outskirts of Palermo. The garrison expects no attack. Germans believe the nearest Americans are still 100 kilometers away. Truscott does not stop. Jeeps burst into the city from 3 directions. By 1800 hours downtown, Palermo is under American control. The Germans retreat in panic, abandoning fuel, ammunition, and food depots. Total distance, 172 kilometers in 13.5 hours. Average speed, 13 kilometers per hour. It seems modest. But this is along mountain paths where only mules had gone before. At 2015, the German command receives news of Palermo's fall. General Hans Valentin Hube cannot believe it. 170 kilometers in a day? Through mountains? Impossible. But it happened, and it was only the beginning. July 26, 1943, eastern Sicily. Montgomery's British army is stuck at Catania. Germans hold firm on the Cimito River. The British attack for 5 days, lose 1,200 men, and advance only 3 kilometers. Patton sees a chance. If the Germans can be bypassed from the west, across the island's center, the Americans could reach Messina, the only port for evacuation to the mainland. Distance, 240 kilometers, no roads. Patton summons Colonel William Darby, commander of the 1st Ranger Battalion. "Bill, how long to reach Messina?" 2 days, sir, if the Germans don't stop us. They won't if you move fast enough. July 27th, 0300 hours. Darby's task force departs from near Nicolosi. 530 Rangers, 87 Jeeps, 12 light trucks. Plan: move through the interior, avoiding main roads where ambushes may lie. The first 40 kilometers along dirt track, 50 kilometers per hour. By 0600, section complete. Next comes the Nebrodi mountain range. Narrow, rocky paths, gradients up to 35 degrees. Landslides in places, cleared by hand. Speed drops to 10 to 15 kilometers per hour, but the column keeps moving. By 1400, 95 kilometers covered. Half-hour stop. Maintenance, food. 3 jeeps break suspension. Repaired in 25 minutes. By 1430, movement resumes. Ahead, the town of Nicosia. Recon reports a German roadblock. 30 soldiers, 2 machine guns. Darby chooses not to halt. The first 3 jeeps open fire at 400 meters. The column smashes through at full speed. The roadblock is destroyed in 4 minutes. Americans lose only 2 wounded. By 2200, another 110 kilometers completed. First day's total, 205 kilometers. Night in a mountain gorge. Soldiers sleep 3 to 4 hours, standing guard in turns. July 28th, 0530. March resumes. 95 kilometers to Messina. Recon reports, bridge over the Polino River destroyed, no detour. Darby orders engineers to build a crossing. Using remnants of supports, they lay metal beams and planks. Time required, 2 hours 40 minutes. At 10:20, crossing begins. Jeeps pass one by one, 5 kilometers per hour. Beams bend but hold. By 1300, the column is across. The final stretch, 60 kilometers along the coast. The road is level. Speed rises to 70 kilometers per hour. At 1650, the first jeeps enter Messina's outskirts. Total distance, 298 kilometers. Time, 37 hours 50 minutes. Average speed, including all stops, 7.9 kilometers per hour. Pure driving time, 28 hours. Average speed on the move, 10.6 kilometers per hour. Through mountains, along trails, under fire. At 1830, the German command receives a report. Americans are at Messina. General Hube calls Oberleutnant Kurt Meyer, the intelligence officer who, 2 days earlier, saw the column near Nicolosi. "Are you sure it is the same group?" "Yes, Herr General, the markings match." "They covered nearly 300 kilometers in 2 days, through the center of the island?" "Yes, Herr General." Pause. "Impossible. But the Americans already stand at Messina. An undeniable fact." July 29, 1943. Wehrmacht headquarters in Sicily, at Cireale. General Hans Valentin Hube convenes a conference. Intelligence chief, chief of staff, division commanders. On the table, a map with the route of the American column from Nicolosi to Messina. "Explain to me how this is possible," Hube says curtly. Colonel Gerhard Franz, head of intelligence, spreads the reports. At 0430, July 27th, the column sighted near Nicolosi. At 1450, same day, Nicosia, plus 95 kilometers. July 28th, 1650, Messina. Total route approximately 280 to 300 kilometers. Our Kubelwagens, could they do this? Franz shrugs. Theoretically, yes. But at least 4 to 5 days required, and that under ideal conditions. No resistance, no repairs. And they did it in 2, under fire, through mountains. Yes, Herr General. Hube turns to his chief of staff. What vehicles are they using exactly? According to prisoners, light reconnaissance cars of American manufacture. Weighed about 1 ton, 4-wheel drive, 60 horsepower. Locals call them Jeep. 60 horsepower? Our Kubelwagen has 25. Yes, but it is not just power. There is a low gear, climb steep slopes, sturdy spring suspension, and most important, complete standardization. Every unit identical, parts interchangeable. How many of these vehicles do the Americans have? On Sicily, about 5,000. In total army, more than 200,000. Production about 600 per day. Hube studies the map for a long time and concludes quietly, "So, it is not chance, it is a system." "Exactly so, Herr General." That same day, a report goes to Berlin. The Americans possess mobility we cannot match. Their light vehicles move where ours bog down. They bypass, encircle, cut retreats. We cannot hold defense when the enemy moves 3 times faster. Urgently recommend developing a Jeep equivalent. Reply arrives August 4th. Development of a new light car, minimum 18 months. Increase of Kubelwagen output limited by resource shortages. Recommend tactical changes. Hube understands there is no solution. Defeat grows not only on the battlefield, it is born on the roads. June 6, 1944, D-Day. On 5 beachheads land 156,000 soldiers and about 10,000 vehicles. Among them, 2,400 jeeps. By the end of the first day, already 4,800. By the end of the first week, 18,000. That is more than all the light vehicles the Wehrmacht had on the entire Western Front. But the key is not numbers. It is the role of the machines. Omaha Beach, morning of June 7th. The 1st Infantry Division has secured its ground, but casualties are heavy. 2,000 wounded. The standard evacuation system, medical trucks to field hospitals to ships, takes 4 to 6 hours for a single soldier. Command decides differently. Ambulance jeeps. A jeep is fitted with 2 stretchers above the hood and rear seats. and another 2 inside after benches are removed. In total, 4 wounded per vehicle. Speed on the coastal road, about 50 kilometers per hour. Distance to evacuation point, 8 kilometers. Full cycle, round trip with loading, about 25 minutes. 1 Jeep in a day makes 16 to 18 trips, 64 to 72 evacuees. 100 Jeeps, 6,400 to 7,200 per day. In the first week in Normandy alone, ambulance jeeps evacuated about 43,000 wounded. Survival of the severely injured rises from 64% in North Africa to 82%. The reason is time. Delivered to a surgeon within 1 hour, a man's chance is 4 times higher than if he waits 4 to 6 hours. The Jeep literally gives that extra hour. And this is only one of its functions. June 10, 1944, Normandy. General Omar Bradley, commander of the 1st U.S. Army, works not from a bunker, but from a mobile command post. A simple Jeep with an SCR 510 radio, range 10 kilometers voice, 25 kilometers by telegraph. He is constantly moving, division to division, from headquarters to the front and back. In a day, 80 to 120 kilometers. German generals command from fortified posts. Their decisions travel by phone or courier with delays of 2 to 4 hours. Bradley receives the picture directly on the spot and decides within 20 to 30 minutes. The difference in tempo proves decisive. June 14th, battle for Carentan. The 101st Airborne storms the town. Progress, 200 meters in 3 hours. General Maxwell Taylor asks for reinforcements. At 11:40, Bradley receives the radio call. 15 minutes later, he is at Taylor's post, assesses the situation, and at 12:10, orders a tank battalion shifted from a neighboring sector. At 14:30, the tanks engage. By 1700, Carentan is taken. The whole cycle, less than 3 hours. For comparison, June 15th, a German request from St. Lo was reviewed by Army Group B only on the 16th. Reinforcements arrived on June 18th, 72 hours late. The Jeep accelerates not only top-down command, but bottom-up communication. Every infantry company has at least 2 Jeeps, for the commander and for signalers with radios. The commander can call artillery directly. No long chains of approval. Time from request to first shell, 5 to 8 minutes, compared to 20 to 30 in the Wehrmacht. Every German soldier feels this difference. Obergefreiter Hans Müller of the 352nd Infantry Division writes on June 18, 1944, "The Americans fire so quickly, as if they see us through the ground. We only start digging trenches, and shells are already falling, as if someone sits next to their guns and points with his finger. He does not know how close he is to the truth. American artillery observers are indeed close, in jeeps 200 to 300 meters behind the front line, watching, sending coordinates by radio, batteries opening fire, speed, accuracy, effectiveness." July 25, 1944. Operation Cobra. The Americans smash German defenses near St. Lo to break into open country, unleash armored divisions, and drive deep into France. Ahead lies Brittany, a peninsula with the key ports of Brest, Saint-Malo, Lorient, crucial for Allied supply. The problem? Germans hold the ports. Brest has about 35,000 soldiers, concrete forts, minefields, anti-tank ditches. Staff estimates 6 to 8 weeks to capture Brittany. General George Patton thinks differently. On August 1st, taking command of the U.S. Third Army, his first order is, do not stop. Move day and night. Bypass resistance. Leave garrisons isolated. The goal is speed, not battles. Operational groups form. 2,000 to 3,000 men. 300 to 400 jeeps. 50 to 60 light tanks. Several companies of mechanized artillery. One mission, reach the ports as fast as possible. August 2nd, 0600. Colonel Bruce Clark's first group departs Avranches to Brest, 240 kilometers straight, about 280 by road. Clark avoids the main route. He splits into parallel branches, country lanes, forest tracks. Speed, 40 to 50 kilometers per hour on roads, 20 to 30 off-road. At 0920, first German roadblock near Pontorson, 40 soldiers, 2 anti-tank guns. Clark does not engage. The main column detours north along a farm track, while 10 jeeps with machine guns hold the front, distracting. The bypass takes 35 minutes. The column barely loses pace. By 1800, 140 kilometers covered. Stop 4 hours. Refuel, eat, short rest. At 2200, march resumes. Night is hardest. Headlights off to avoid airstrikes. Only faint tail lights to guide. Speed drops to 15 to 20 kilometers per hour, but the column keeps cohesion. August 3rd, 0400. 50 kilometers remain to Brest. At that moment, German command has just received an 18-hour late report about Americans near Pontorson, not suspecting they are already at Brest's outskirts. At 0630, Clark's first jeeps enter Brest's suburbs. Distance covered, 287 kilometers in 24 hours 30 minutes. Average speed, 11.7 kilometers per hour, including pauses. Germans have prepared fortress defenses, batteries, garrisons. Clark does not assault. He blocks the city, cuts supply, isolates the garrison, and instantly redirects his column towards Saint-Malo. In 10 days, Patton's group sweep all Brittany, block all ports, cut off German garrisons. Total American losses, about 850. In exchange, about 45,000 Germans are trapped without supply or communication. By late September, they surrender one after another. An operation expected to take 6 to 8 weeks is essentially resolved in 10 days. In Patton's diary appears one line: "Speed is everything. Not strength, not the number of tanks, speed. If you move faster than the enemy, you have already won. And the Jeep is the tool of that speed." December 16th, 1944, Ardennes Forest, Belgium. At 0530, German artillery opens fire on American positions, more than 1,600 guns, the heaviest bombardment in the West since 1940. An hour later begins the offensive, 200,000 soldiers and 600 tanks. Hitler's last gamble. The Americans are exhausted. The 106th Infantry, fresh, inexperienced. The 28th Division, worn out from Hürtgen Forest. By the end of the first day, Germans advance 10 kilometers, encircle 2 regiments of the 106th, about 8,000 men. Panic? No, because the Americans have an advantage the Germans lack: communication. December 17th, 0800. A Jeep Scout of the 7th Armored breaks out of encirclement, driver Private Clarence Lister, radio operator Corporal Robert Meter. Snow road, fog, visibility 50 meters, speed 30 kilometers per hour. Suddenly ahead, a Panther tank at 100 meters. Lister swerves right, leaps through snowdrift, crashes through bushes. While the Panther's turret turns slowly, the Jeep vanishes into trees. Then cross-country, ravines, bypassing columns. At 10:30, the crew reaches the 82nd Airborne positions. Data on the breakthrough delivered. Time from attack to report, 5 hours. By contrast, German reconnaissance with courier delays lags 12 to 18 hours. But the worst is weather. Winter 1944-45 is one of the coldest in 50 years. Minus 20 degrees Celsius, snow up to a meter, roads icebound. Light German cars skid. Kübelwagons lack weight for grip. Wheels spin. Vehicles slide into ditches. The Jeeps go on. The secret? Chains on all 4 wheels, even weight distribution. About 1,100 kilograms, 275 per wheel, and 4-wheel drive. If the front slips, the rear pulls. If the rear slides, the front pushes. December 22nd, 1944. Bastogne surrounded. The 101st Airborne holds out. Supplies cut. Airdrops fail due to fog and low clouds. Another way is needed. By ground. December 25th, 1645. The 4th Armored Division under General Crichton Abrams punches a corridor 800 meters wide under artillery fire. The gap opens, and the convoy begins. Jeeps with ammunition, medicine, food. They move single file, 50 meters apart, 60 kilometers per hour. Shells burst left and right. One Jeep hits a mine. Another is struck directly. The rest keep pace. In 4 hours, 247 Jeeps pass through, delivering 68 tons of cargo. Bastogne survives. December 26th, the German offensive is broken for good. March 1945. The Rhine, the last natural barrier on the road into the heart of the Reich. On March 22nd, the Americans cross near Oppenheim. The defense is broken. First across the pontoon, bridges go the jeeps, ahead of tanks and heavy guns. To widen the bridgehead, scout approaches, probe for weak spots. March 23rd, 0600 hours. A reconnaissance platoon of the 9th Armored Division, 12 jeeps, pushes eastward. Autobahn, 90 kilometers per hour. Roadblocks are set up for slow columns. And cannot react in time. 3 posts are broken, on the move, with machine gun fire. By 1400 hours, they have already covered 180 kilometers, reaching the approaches to Limburg and Erlan. The garrison is stunned. Yesterday, the Americans were on the Rhine. How are they here today? In his report of March 24th, Oberleutnant Karl Schmidt writes, "Soldiers refuse to take positions. Why bother? The Americans appear where they cannot possibly be, and within an hour they are already here. We cannot organize a defense in time." From the Rhine to the Elbe, about 400 kilometers, the Germans plan to hold at each river and every town, counting on 3 to 4 months. The Americans cover the distance in 17 days, an average of 23 kilometers per day, 3 times faster than any previous advance. The role of the jeep is colossal. Ammunition to the front, evacuation of wounded, communication between units, reconnaissance of routes. By the end of April 1945, the Allies stand on the Elbe. On April 25th comes the historic meeting with the Red Army near Torgau. The war in Europe is ending, and the jeep is one reason for that speed. June 1945, the Victory Parade in Berlin. T-34s rumble, beside them American Shermans, columns closed by British Churchills. And at the front, a modest Willys MB, without armor, without parade glamour. On board, Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied forces in Europe. He chose the jeep deliberately. Later in his memoirs, Eisenhower will write, "If I were asked to name 3 things that most influenced victory, I would say the atomic bomb, the Dakota C-47 aircraft, and the jeep. And if I had to choose one, I would choose the jeep." During the war, 640,649 jeeps, Willys MB and Ford GPW, were produced. They served in the U.S. Army, with the British Willys, with the Red Army through Lend-Lease, Willis, Americos. They saw the Sahara and the Ardennes, Burma and the Apennines, the beaches of Normandy and the streets of Berlin. They carried generals and privates, ammunition and medics, scouts and signalers. They were blown up, they got stuck, and then they went on. After the war, generals often recalled Sherman's B-17s, heavy artillery. The jeep was mentioned less often, because it was not a super weapon, but something else. Logistics, communication, speed, reliability. The ability to appear where no road existed, to be where the enemy did not expect, to act before he could react. The Wehrmacht was shocked when American jeeps covered 400 miles in 48 hours. The shock was not at magic technology, but at the realization war had changed. Victory goes not only to those with the biggest caliber, but to those who move faster and deliver strength in time. Today, in 2025, the word jeep has become generic, often meaning any off-road vehicle, but once it meant more. The difference between victory and defeat, between life and death, between making it in time and being too late. Museums worldwide display Willys MBs with polished plaques, but plaques do not tell the real story of Private Lister, who in winter 1944 broke through forests, of Captain Carter, who organized convoys in the desert, of medics driving frozen roads under fire, of thousands of nameless drivers who each morning climbed into the seat not knowing if they would return. They did not build monuments, they drove. Through dust and snow, through fire and steel, they drove, and they won. When a German officer in Sicily in July 1943 read the report of 400 miles in 48 hours, he did not see the essence. Before him was the future of war, a world where speed mattered more than armor, where logistics outweighed caliber, where 1 ton of steel on wheels could move history itself. Do we remember this today? That great victories often rest on simple things: reliability, tempo, the ability to be where needed, exactly when needed, 400 miles in 48 hours, not just a number. A lesson. In a world that accelerates, victory belongs to the one who is faster. And often the simplest solution turns out to be the best.